Okay, Giant team members, in this video lecture we are going to talk about innovation, and really change is innovation. And of course, organizations nowadays are looking for those employees that are innovative and that could, to use a cliche, think outside of the box and come up with new ways of doing things, or new values or features as part of the products or services, or just entirely new ways of doing things, or entirely new products or service. So it's important, though, that we take innovation, we kind of break it down a little bit and talk about what are some different ways to look at innovation, what are some different things that can be innovated, and how do organizations look at those things and view those things through what kind of perspective do they look, so you as an employee or a change agent or somebody can approach innovative change in a very specific way. So obviously innovation is a key driver of change, and there's really two ways to look at the type of innovative change we can have. We can have product innovation, which is probably what we're most familiar with, and we're talking about, new and or improved gadgets or things like that, right? We could come up with a better camera for our cell phone, or a different type of car, an electric car, or the way we drive cars. Those are all product innovation, new gadget. The other one, though, is operational innovations. And maybe we don't think about that too long. We are going to talk about operational innovation because it's a very important thing, but a lot of times it's overlooked because it's just not as fancy. It's just not as attention grabbing as product innovation. But with operational innovation, we're looking at changing the ways that we organize, the ways that we lead, the ways that we work, the ways that we motivate. And you can see that there's probably a lot of bottom line cost savings in operational efficiencies and operational innovation. It's just something maybe we don't associate that often with innovation because it tends to be maybe a little more on the boring side. Clayton Christensen wrote in 2000 about sustaining innovation and disruptive innovation. And as we've gone along in these 6 classes, I think I've recommended some articles or some readings. I would highly recommend Clayton Christensen's book on disruptive innovation. It is really a groundbreaking book on, of course, disruptive innovation, but he does talk also about sustaining innovation. And it's a timely book because we had different ways of looking strategically at an organization. What a company does strategically up until that point. We're looking at people, we're looking at resources, we're looking at the industry in which the organization operates. But Clayton Christensen, and I think it came from the earlier writings of Joe Schumpeter, an economist back in the 20s, kind of looked and said, okay, we're living in a different world now, and it's really going to be these disruptive innovations that are driving change and are driving organizations, right? And creating these small startups that are becoming these big organizations that'll need to be, they'll be on the competitive screen really quickly. So as far as sustaining innovations, we're just talking about improving what it is that we're doing, that we're currently doing, that exists now. So it's more along the lines of those smaller incremental type changes, and change is necessary, even if it is small incremental change, even if it is sustaining what it is that we're doing now. We still need to be making these continual type improvements. Disruptive innovation is wholly new processes or services. We are just kind of blowing up what's currently being done. And that doesn't necessarily mean chaos or upheaval or craziness. Usually it kind of starts mildly and quiet and then builds to something. So in essence, how Clayton Christensen described disruptive innovation, he said, we have products and services that are out on the market. And these products and services, every year, will get upgrades. There'll be more features added to it. And as a result, the cost will go up for whatever these products or services are, and this will continue for a period of time. Until at some point, the consumer realizes that, number one, they're paying too much for the product. Number two, they really don't need all of these things that are being added to, well, let's just take a product, for example, that it's kind of becoming confusing to deal with, and there's too much going on with the product itself. And again, the cost is becoming a little bit prohibitive. And in those circumstances, it's ideal for somebody to come, maybe a smaller startup, to come in with more of a bare bones product. Comes, a stripped down type product. Very good functionality, but stripped down and very low cost. And what you see is that you see some people adapting this newer technology, and then it kind of catching on, and it reaches a breaking point, and then just kind of takes off. So it's not this chaos and upheaval that happens immediately where someone says, "Hey, here's what we're going to do." It's maybe a stripped down, cheaper version of something that's going on right now, but takes off. My fear, as somebody who studies business, is a lot of these startups eventually get bought out by bigger companies, and I think we're losing some of this disruptive innovation that can happen in the marketplace. Because if you have somebody like an Apple or a Microsoft, it's easy for them just to say, okay, well, we see what's going on here. This is something that can challenge our product, and we're going to just go ahead and buy them up and either integrate their technology or just let them wither on the vine somewhere. And you look at something like operating systems on computers. They've gotten bigger. There's more and more and more features being added into the interface. They're becoming far more expensive. To me, it would seem like a good time for somebody to come in with a stripped down operating system model that's cheaper, but has great functionality. And that hasn't happened in pretty much my lifetime. So you wonder where some of that innovation might be. Maybe somewhere down the road you might see it with cell phones. You might see it with PCs or something else, where someone comes in and just says, okay, here's a cheaper version, fully functional, but doesn't have all the bells and whistles that might be confusing you a little bit. So that's how Christensen described this disruptive innovation. There's a lot of examples of companies who have used that model of disruption to kind of introduce new products, even that would be in competition to themselves, but it was the right move and the right thing to do. Some of the challenges of those operational change managers, and we talked about operational, the way we lead, organize, and work. Some of the challenges of those operational innovators. Number one, operational innovation is kind of seen as low status. The product, the service innovation, the new product, that's seen as high-end, glossy, everybody wants a piece of that, versus the operational, which is kind of seen as low status within the organization. Number two, change takes time to appear when you're talking operationally. So, it may be months or even years until those operation efficiencies are realized, and by that time, people have kind of moved on to something else. Ownership is vague. A lot of times it involves cross-functional areas where we're dealing with other people in other areas, and who really owns that change project is kind of hard to really pinpoint where that's coming from. And it's hard to convince others that we need operational change, that operational change is necessary, and this is going to be the result of operational change. So when you take all of those things together, those operational changes, those operational efficiencies are hard to sell. They're hard to sell, and they're really hard to maybe see through and then ultimately get credit for. So they aren't undertaken as much as maybe the product or more of disruptive innovation. Again, why don't more companies engage in disruptive innovation? Well, there's a few good reasons for that. Number one, it can disrupt or jeopardize existing business models. You're introducing something new, something radical, and maybe you're just not set up for that. Maybe you're just not organizationally ready for that. So that could really jeopardize the business model. I believe it was Intel who introduced a lower end chip that was in competition with some of its higher end chips. But it needed to do something because its higher end chips were getting expensive, they were getting very fancy. They were becoming almost unaffordable in some of the PCs that were being distributed. So they just came out with a lower end chip model, and that worked out for them. But there were a lot of people saying, "Wait, that could jeopardize their model. And what if everybody starts buying this chip? Now their higher end chips are going to kind of go by the wayside and not be around." So it can disrupt your business model. There's no routine processes for dealing with disruptive innovation. There's no playbook for how do we do this, how do we introduce this new product, how do we sustain what we're currently doing, but have this new product introduced. It's often reserved for smaller startups, like I talked about earlier. It's that company that sees a hole, sees a gap, sees an opportunity, and starts up small. We have some early adapters, and then the thing takes off. So big companies usually don't engage in this disruptive innovation. It's easier to improve upon existing products or services than it is to come out with an entirely new product line with maybe less features or something along those lines. Some of the habits though of disruptive innovators, and this is Dyer in 2011. They're associating. They see connection between things that don't necessarily seem related, and they also could draw together unrelated items. So they could really see that big picture, that conceptual thinking, and then what we call analyze and synthesize. They could pull things apart and put it back together in different ways it's new and different. So they have that ability. They're questioning. They always challenge what others take for granted. Here's the way we did it, yeah, but why? They're observing. They watch behaviors between suppliers, between customers, between competitors, looking for new ways of doing things. They experiment. They like to tinker with things. And sometimes accidentally they come up with new things, seeing what happens, and then this new insight tends to emerge. And they're networking. They attend conferences. They're always out there talking to suppliers and customers, and they're making those connections because other people have similar problems. And if you gather bits and pieces from just about everybody, you're going to be able to see a much better, a much bigger picture of what's going on. Okay, so that's our discussion on innovation. We have sustaining innovation, and we have disruptive innovation, and we need to look at those in different ways. That disruptive innovation sometimes it's a little harder for bigger organizations to undergo those disruptive innovative changes. That's why you usually see smaller companies doing it. But it's also important to understand that sustaining innovation, those operational efficiency changes, are very important to organizations, and they shouldn't be overlooked or dismissed in lieu of maybe the more larger transformational disruptive innovation changes.